We're about to witness the story of the Titanic and its final moments. When the collision happens, we'll see it from inside the ship. We'll look at the iceberg that sank the Titanic and the marks it left behind, using real footage. Then, we'll perform an experiment to understand what those who fell into the freezing water truly experienced, and we'll chase the facts behind the tragedy. The sound you just heard belonged to the Titanic's distress signal. Through telegraphs, SOS messages were sent to nearby ships using Morse signals. The Titanic had begun to sink slowly. At the telegraph station was a 25-year-old young man named Jack Phillips. He never left his post, even as water filled the room. He acted heroically until the very end, but all his efforts were in vain. The Titanic would not be found again until 73 years later, and everything would start with the discovery of the wreck. This is the mysterious story of the Titanic. It all began many, many years ago. In 1912, 111 years before today, newspapers printed bold headlines, "The Titanic's First Voyage." Images of the ship and ticket prices appeared beside the article. The story of the Titanic was actually a challenge, a rivalry. Transatlantic passenger trade was a profitable and competitive business, with luxury liners carrying wealthy travelers and immigrants. Two major companies were in a fierce race. The White Star Line decided to build two ships that would set records crossing the Atlantic. But rather than focusing on speed, they chose a different path: luxury and comfort. In 1908, the company assembled an army of mostly Irish workers to build what they called a revolutionary passenger ship, the largest, most luxurious, and most comfortable ever made. Their motto was, "We may not be the fastest, but who would want to spend a whole ocean voyage being seasick?" Their goal, to dominate the journey between Europe and America within 5 years. Soon the massive RMS Olympic was launched, the largest ship the world had ever seen at 45,000 tons, with space for over 1,000 passengers. But shortly after, an even greater vessel was prepared, the RMS Titanic. Nearly 14,000 workers helped build her. When Titanic was launched, 200,000 people gathered to witness it. Those who saw her slide into the water said it felt as if the earth itself was moving. For the people of that time, this was a ship beyond imagination. Just one of its anchors weighed 15 tons. The interior was filled with the most expensive, extravagant furnishings. Yet some critics warned, instead of spending all that money on luxury, they should have invested it in technology. Because by then, 4 propeller ships with better maneuverability already existed. But White Star Line chose grandeur over innovation. On April 10th, 1912, Titanic departed from England on her maiden voyage to New York under the command of Captain Edward Smith. She first stopped at Cherbourg, France, then Queenstown, now Cobe, Ireland, before setting out across the Atlantic. Before departure, warnings were issued. There could be icebergs along the southern route. These were common alerts for ships crossing the Atlantic, nothing unusual. At 9:30 p.m., a ship ahead of Titanic, the Mesaba, reported large icebergs nearby. The message was received by the radio operators Phillips and Harold Bride, but never reached the captain. They were busy sending personal messages for first-class passengers, the early 1900s equivalent of social media. As night deepened, the temperature dropped sharply, as if the breath of death was in the air. The sea was eerily calm, like glass. In the crow's nest, 2 lookouts rotated every 2 hours. As midnight approached, they noticed a faint, dark shape ahead, difficult to see in the moonless night. It was an iceberg. Lookout Frederick Fleet struck the warning bell 3 times and phoned the bridge. "Iceberg right ahead," First Officer Murdoch ordered. "Hard a starboard." The helm turned swiftly, but Titanic, weighing over 46,000 tons, could not turn or stop in time. Just 37 seconds later, at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic struck the iceberg on her starboard side. The collision sliced open the hull like a razor. Underwater rivets popped loose, and 5 watertight compartments began flooding. Captain Smith summoned the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, to assess the damage. After inspecting the compartments, Andrews returned with grim news. 5 are flooding. The ship cannot be saved. They knew the Titanic was doomed. Captain Smith gave the order, "Women and children first, to the lifeboats." Panic spread among the passengers. At that point, the operators began sending SOS signals to nearby ships. Only 32 kilometers away was the Californian, but her radio operator had gone to bed. Further away, the Carpathia received the distress calls and began steaming toward Titanic, but it would take 4 hours to reach them. The Titanic only had 2. At 12:15 a.m., rockets were fired into the sky, bright flares meant to signal distress. But the Californian's captain, Stanley Lord, was confused. Were these distress flares, or just identification signals? He hesitated and went back to bed. By 2:20 a.m., the Titanic's bow was completely underwater, her stern rising high into the air, and then, with a terrible roar, she broke apart and slipped beneath the ocean. The Californian, just 32 kilometers away, remained motionless through the night. Hundreds screamed for help in the freezing dark, but no one came. At dawn, the Carpathia arrived. Only those who made it into lifeboats survived. Photographs from that morning even show the very iceberg that doomed the Titanic, scratched and scarred with traces of red paint from her hull. If Captain Lord of the Californian had acted on the flares, perhaps hundreds more could have been saved. Later, a doctor named Mike conducted a chilling experiment to understand how the freezing Atlantic killed Titanic survivors. He recreated the ocean conditions, water at 12 degrees Celsius, though it was closer to 0 degrees Celsius that night. A volunteer entered the water, monitored by thermal cameras. Within minutes, body temperature plummeted. After 20 minutes, violent shivering began. If he had stayed longer, hypothermia would have been fatal. Tests showed that after exposure, hand strength dropped by 60% and muscle control nearly vanished. Those who fell into the water that night likely died within 30 minutes, in agony. So, what truly caused the Titanic to sink? The iceberg tore open the hull like a knife. But why did the steel fail so easily? Back then, steel shipbuilding was still new. Titanic's front sections used iron rivets, which were hammered and sealed by hand. Though tests later showed they were quite strong, the nature of the collision, a glancing scrape, not a direct hit, caused the rivets to pop one by one, opening a gash nearly 9 meters long. Had Titanic struck head-on, she might have survived. But fate had other plans. That night there was no moon. The sea was unnaturally calm, no waves breaking at the base of the iceberg to give it away. The atmospheric conditions may even have created a kind of mirage, making distant objects appear blurred and ghostly, hiding the iceberg until it was far too late. The iceberg itself likely began its journey 300 days earlier, breaking off from Greenland and carried by the Labrador Current into the North Atlantic. It had been formed from snow that fell thousands of years before, compressed into a block of ice weighing 1.5 million tons, a frozen relic of time, waiting silently in the dark for the Titanic to appear. By 5:30 a.m., daylight revealed the horror. Over 1,500 people, mostly men and lower-class passengers, had perished. Captain Smith, on his final voyage before retirement, went down with his ship. Just 3 hours earlier, families had been chatting in their cabins, parents tucking their children into bed. Within hours, mothers watched their children disappear into icy darkness, and fathers stood helpless as their families slipped away. Those who survived would never forget that night. Behind this brief story of the Titanic, there remain countless mysteries yet to be told. Take 2 seconds to subscribe to the channel and like the video to support us. See you in the next one.